Jey Uso and Jimmy Uso have reunited, which means we are one step closer towards the official reunion of the original Bloodline. Only a couple more people to bring back into this thing. We've got Roman Reigns, we've got Jimmy Uso, and now we've got Jey Uso. And on the road to War Games, there's still a couple more to be added. But that was, of course, the biggest thing coming out of this week's edition of WWE SmackDown, which was a notable show from Brooklyn. You had several significant storyline developments, including what I thought was a great sequence, starting with the Tag Team Championship #1 contenders match leading into the Tag Team Championship match, and then, of course, the finish, which led to the next chapter in the Bloodline reunion. But before we get into everything that happened on this week's SmackDown, I keep telling you guys, I am on Twitter now. Follow me there, at WrestleBlake, having some fun conversations about everything going on in WWE. So click that link on the description below and the pinned comment, and let me know your thoughts on everything WWE that we discuss over there on Twitter. And before we jump into it quickly, I told you guys this video is a little bit late. Usually we do the SmackDown reaction shows early in the morning on Saturdays, but this one's a little delayed. I told you guys on Monday there would be a reason for that. And well, speaking of the bloodline, I guess I have my own bloodline because my son was born on Thursday, so we have been at the hospital, just getting back. I watched SmackDown from the hospital, taking my notes as usual. But yes, so perhaps Blake's bloodline versus Roman's bloodline one day in WWE. But for now, that is the reason why this video going up a little bit later than usual, but I appreciate you guys' patience on that. But let's talk about SmackDown, and let's start with the Bloodline, because it was not a good night for Solo Sikoa's version of the Bloodline because they lost the Tag Team Championships to the Motor City Machine Guns. And, we talked about it on Monday's reaction video. I said, now that Jey has lost the Intercontinental Championship to Braun Breaker, it's pretty clear that they don't really, and WWE probably understands this, right? And we talked about this before, you don't need the titles to be involved to have this big Bloodline War Games match. You don't need any sort of titles to be on the line. This is more about, again, the groups themselves versus the championship. So after Jey loses the Intercontinental title on Monday, what does that do? Well, it gives Jey the motivation to now try to find a way to screw the Bloodline out of their tag team championships. And that's exactly what happened. So you get the titles off of the Bloodline, Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa, which, again, I have no problem with because I don't think that it was anything other than just kind of a device to use to get to this point in the story. And so Jey interferes, he costs them the championships, and so it's kind of fitting. It's the eye for an eye thing here. You're going to cost me my title, I'm going to cost you your title, right? And then, that's also where you get the big embrace. You get that emotional moment, one of those big moments in this story that we knew we had to get to at some point to get this thing actually moving in the right direction. You had to bring Jey and Jimmy back together. And I think that was something, again, that was going to be inevitable. It's just how were they going to do it? And I've seen some people, just kind of scrolling on Twitter and such and other places, criticize maybe did they get to this too quickly? Was this something where maybe this could have played out a little bit longer because you did kind of have it escalate pretty quickly after that first initial Jimmy trying to get to Jey, which happened, 2 weeks ago now almost. So did it kind of play out a little quicker than expected? Perhaps, but, again, I think that's probably a product of the way the schedule plays out, where you do have Crown Jewel involved in here. And spoiler alert, for the SmackDown taping for next week, there is another match added to Crown Jewel, and it does involve this group here. I won't spoil the match for you, but it does seem like maybe one of the reasons why they did this quicker than some may have expected is because they wanted to get to a certain match that is going to take place at Crown Jewel. So I will not spoil it for you, but trust me, you can find it. It's available out there if you want to know exactly who's going to be involved in that match at Crown Jewel. But again, nonetheless, it was going to happen eventually. You're now a month away from War Games, so you had to kind of get there. And even I said, you guys remember several weeks ago, I'm like, they got to start speeding this thing up if we're going to get to the Bloodline. So if you want to pick some things there, I suppose you could say, why didn't they start this maybe several weeks earlier? Maybe. But the end result is the same. You're still getting the Bloodline back together, and the big embrace from Jimmy and Jey was one of the biggest moments of this story thus far in terms of the Bloodline Civil War. And, of course, you also have the reaction from the original Tribal Chief, Roman Reigns. Kind of see him here in deep thought, which was kind of the, sort of your visual to go off the air on SmackDown. And I think it's good because we've talked about this before. Reigns is really, as we said, sort of struggling a bit. This isn't just a new Roman Reigns. You still have kind of that layer of this Roman Reigns character still there that was there before he made his comeback, right? It's still the Roman Reigns who went into WrestleMania 40, as the undisputed champion for however many days. And you still have this guy who loves the power, right? He is the tribal chief. He's the guy that sits at the head of the table. And now he's starting to see, these different things. He's seeing Jey being able to forgive Jimmy. You see these guys get back on the same page, and that, of course, makes Roman think about this even more. He has to think deeper, and this is sort of the evolution of Roman Reigns. And I think that is kind of not necessarily a lost part of this whole equation, because it really has been all about bloodline versus bloodline, but you can't just skim over the idea that Roman Reigns is going to go from being who he was for however many years to then all of a sudden just being able to forgive everyone and playing nice with everyone. That just wasn't going to happen. So I like the way they've done this. It's been a little subtle at times about how they're trying to do it. Whether it's Roman kind of, really trying not to want to have to bring Jey back into this, and then, him sort of trying to manipulate Solo last week, and now he kind of sees that the Usos have gotten back together, makes him think even further, okay, maybe this is something where we do need Jey, and now what's next? And we know, like I said, what's next is going to be what they're going to have to do from here, and it is going to be, how do we get Sami Zayn and Paul Heyman back into the equation, because they are going to be the final two. And that we talked about on these videos for months now, really. We're like, what order are they going to go in? What is the order that you do to bring everyone back? And we're like, okay, who's going to be last? Who's going to be first, right? Well, Jimmy coming back first made the most sense, but now you get the Usos back together, so you have sort of the original three are there. Do you go with the wise man himself to bring him back, or is it going to be Sami next? And, I've seen you guys kind of pitch some different hypothetical scenarios here where, maybe it's going to take Paul Heyman to get Sami Zayn back into this thing, because I keep saying Sami is the one, unlike these others, he is not blood, right? He's the honorary Uso. And so we had that moment at the Rumble where Sami hauls off on Roman Reigns. They had their championship match, all of that. So that's something that certainly you have to find a way to sort of get him back in the equation. And now with Jey back on board, Jey can try to do some convincing. Will it take Paul Heyman? How do those interactions happen between Reigns and Zayn? A lot of questions still to be answered, despite getting a big piece of the puzzle put back in place here with the Usos getting back on the same page. So, that was, kind of the big thing coming out of this. And like I said, I thought it was fitting for Jey to cost the Bloodline the Tag Team Championships after what they did to him on Monday. And so we'll talk about it next week. The match they're setting up for Crown Jewel, I think, is important too, and it's a big part of the story, I think, moving forward. But I'll hold off on that for now until we get to that next week. But you also have to talk about what you have coming out of this, because I thought the sequence of having the Motor City Machine Guns, Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin, win the first number one contenders match, right? They do that first. Then they win the tag titles. I thought doing that was sort of a very creative way to just keep building the momentum for these guys. And we talked about it like, I don't remember what video it was, maybe in last week sometime. We're thinking, okay, they're getting the number one contenders match. They're going to beat DIY. There's no reason to do this if you're going to have them lose the DIY. It wasn't going to happen. But it became a matter of, all right, are they going to win the tag team championships? And the more momentum, the more you see WWE push them since their debut. You're thinking, all right, this thing has got to happen. Little do we know it's going to happen this quickly, right? You're going to say, all right, maybe it happens after Crown Jewel, something like that. But no, they go ahead and they make it happen here. And I thought that was fantastic because, it isn't always one where you bring in somebody new and they've got to take 6 months before all of a sudden they're to the top of the division, right? Let's call it what it is. The WWE Tag Team division has been hot and cold at times. And, you can look at Raw's example, right? Like, how much of an impact are the Raw Tag Team Championships making right now, the World Tag Team Championships? How much of an impact are they really making on the show week to week? Not a whole lot. How much has really the WWE Tag Team Championships, the Bloodline, been holding? Has that been the big part of this Bloodline Civil War? No, it hasn't. And we talked about all the different scenarios, right, that could play out. Could you have the Bloodline keep the titles? Maybe Jey and Sami come after the Tag Team Championships on the Raw side. Somehow maybe you combine them together, all that. It seemed like that was something they were hinting at after Jey and Sami did beat Finn Balor and JD McDonough. That feels like forever ago now, right? But they quickly moved away from that. And so now, by putting the Tag Team Championships on this new group, which by no means are they new, right? You're talking about industry veterans here for decades. And so by putting the belts on them and doing it in this fashion, beating the Bloodline, and I know, yes, Jey helps, but it automatically makes the Motor City Machine Guns right off the bat, right? It automatically makes them just a must-see tag team because you can look back at the WWE record books and WWE history and say, well, there's not been a lot of teams that have been able to accomplish what they've accomplished in, 3 weeks or whatever it's been, right? So I think that was a great way to do it because now the belts mean something. They're not just used as a prop to be put on somebody to do this or that as part of this faction or that faction. They are put on one of the best tag teams in the world and one of the best tag teams in WWE right now, certainly one of the most accomplished ones. So I thought it was a great idea to do it this way. Don't wait the next week. Don't wait weeks after that. Do it on the same night. It makes these guys look even better, builds them up even more. And so, yeah, I thought that was a great move. And, I mean, look, they had a great match with DIY. It was such a smart idea to bring these guys in, immediately make them feel like a huge deal by having him win the championships in the main event on a very noteworthy edition of SmackDown, given everything that happened on this show. So good for them. Alex Shelley, Chris Sabin, you can tell how much it means to these guys to finally get this opportunity at the WWE level. And, yeah, I think it makes for much more compelling tag team division stuff moving forward by putting the belts on them, not having them sort of held within the group warfare, I guess you could say, when it comes to the Bloodline and the Judgment Day on Raw. So I like the way they did that. So the Motor City Machine Guns are your new WWE Tag Team Champions. But elsewhere, again, we could probably talk about this Bloodline stuff even more, but we'll leave it at what we had for now. Look, the Cody Rhodes and Gunther face-to-face. You probably have heard my thoughts on these face-to-face before, and we had kind of a small interaction between these two recently. And I said, I just didn't think you got a whole lot out of it, right? It feels like one of these matches that you're just trying to get to because it's on the schedule. And I know, they bring out the Crown Jewel title, it's massive, and all this other stuff. But it is just kind of one of these things we already know. They've already told us, basically, it's only going to apply to this part of the year. It's not going to apply, year-round. Like, you're not going to have people chasing the Crown Jewel title and all this. So it's a match you're doing because it fits into the theme, I guess you could say. The same way they used to do PLEs, whether it was Hell in a Cell, Elimination Chamber, which I know they still do. It's a theme type thing. But this raised the stakes so much more because you had a great promo exchange between Cody and Gunther here. And I'm looking at my notes now. I'm like, again, guys, I was doing this very little sleep the past several days, you would expect with a newborn. But, I think just looking at the way they did the back and forth here between Cody and Gunther, I thought Gunther, as always, is so impressive because Gunther really tells it like it is. Like, there was not a lot that Gunther said that I'm looking up and saying, yeah, he's wrong. He's wrong about that. That's just a heel being a heel. You're almost looking up and saying, well, you know what? He's right about that. He's right about that too. Right about that too. He's bringing up how Cody continues to bring everyone, into this and keep everyone kind of hovering around because it's part of the story and all this other stuff. And Gunther brings up how Cody, brought up his daughter last week and all this. Why? What was the reason? And so that is one of those things, and you can tell, like, the crowd in Brooklyn are very behind Gunther here. And you guys know we've always talked about this Cody Rhodes dynamic. It was going to be interesting once he won the title to see how he evolved from there. Because you certainly know that he is kind of the chosen one. And, again, it made way, way more sense, certainly, to do that this past year because of the momentum he had, everything that was going on leading up to WrestleMania 40. It was the right time to make Cody Rhodes the face of WWE. But here we are now, right? 6 months removed, almost 7 months removed, whatever. How has that run been going? And we've mentioned there have been some ups and downs in terms of actual credible challengers and those kind of things that really make a champion. And so I thought Gunther said a lot of things here that could certainly, you can look at Cody and even Gunther's like, Cody makes things too dramatic and those kind of things. How is that going to set with a certain part of the fan base? The fact of the reality is that Cody's still the biggest star, and Cody is still the face of the company right now because he has, become that, like he mentioned, the John Cena schedule and all this other stuff. But I think you do have to be careful a little bit with Cody's character right now because it's not just what he has coming up with Gunther, right? And again, in what was a really great promo exchange, Cody throwing some jabs at Gunther, Gunther's throwing some jabs at Cody, but it's also knowing that they teased it yet again here. It was Randy Orton picking up the championship after he comes out to make the save. We're going to get Cody Rhodes and Randy Orton versus Gunther and Ludwig Kaiser next week. And so Orton comes out to make the save after Kaiser comes out to interfere, and he picks up the title, gives a little glance again, just like we know we're getting there at some point. Cody and Randy Orton, and that's the thing. Is Orton going to say some things that people are going to be like, you know what, we already love cheering Randy Orton. We're going to keep cheering him, even in this kind of feud with Cody Rhodes. that's another discussion we can have, and a much lengthier discussion in terms of what it's going to look like once we get there. But as, like I said, it is something I think you have to be careful about as you go into this, because, Gunther is someone who has gained a lot of goodwill with the fans, and, his promo skills have gotten better and better. And when he's saying things that make you sort of nod your head a little bit against the biggest babyface in the company, I think you kind of have to certainly protect Cody a little bit going into this. So it'll be kind of fascinating, although we know Cody will be the true most cheered person in this match at Crown Jewel, I think, with the way it's set up. So I thought a great exchange between those two. That's what you wanted to see from a face-to-face between Cody and Gunther. Gave you a lot more to kind of chew on as we head towards that match. Speaking of Randy Orton, he had the opening segment with Triple H. And so, kind of I don't know if it's a huge surprise, because we did kind of sort of tee it up last week when Orton was talking about how Aldis couldn't make the decision, needed to go, to someone higher. We knew that someone higher was going to be Triple H. So you have Orton calling out Triple H here. And, basically, Triple H is saying he's trying to protect Orton from Kevin Owens, while Orton thinks it's the other way around. And so you kind of get the interesting exchange between these two as well. And so I think it adds a lot more unpredictability now. We are going to get Randy Orton versus Kevin Owens at Crown Jewel. And so what do you do with this now? Because you do have everything kind of still hovers around Cody Rhodes. This is all a product of what has happened with Cody. Cody is the reason for this match. Cody's the reason why Randy Orton and Kevin Owens are fighting each other. And so how do you kind of go about doing that now, knowing that whatever happens coming out of this, someone is getting back to the Cody Rhodes match, right? And we still think we're going to get Cody versus Owens again, even though I think, again, the biggest destination is to get to Cody versus Orton. And who knows, maybe that is something that gets delayed till either Royal Rumble or WrestleMania 41. Certainly possible. But I think now, man, this Crown Jewel card is looking pretty good, because you have Randy Orton and Kevin Owens added to the mix. And so I really like the way they're doing this. And, I think it's something where even Orton said, like, he didn't want Triple H, the CEO, coming out. He didn't want Paul Levesque coming out. He wanted the cerebral assassin, because he was the person who understood that you handle your business in the ring, and that's what Orton's trying to get here. So eventually, how does this play out? I'm curious to know what you guys think. Certainly, I think now being able to focus a little bit and kind of really look into this, I think it's going to be kind of fascinating to see how they do this thing with Orton and Owens at Crown Jewel. But we'll talk about it next week as we start to make our predictions and go a little bit deeper into that match. Speaking of matches, we know also there's going to be a triple threat match at Crown Jewel, as it was LA Knight who ruined Game 7 between Andrade and Carmelo Hayes. We get no winner in this series, which is kind of fitting when you really consider that LA Knight had already faced Carmelo, had already faced Andrade, and so who cares? Do this whole Game 7, don't even have a winner. Can't say that's my favorite thing, but still, LA Knight decides, you know what, we don't need a winner in the series. I'm just going to face them both, which, of course, was not his call. It was Nick Aldis' call as he announced the triple threat match. I just thought this was where they were headed, because it would have made no sense having already done both of the matches. Why would you go back to one or the other? So LA Knight as a special guest referee ruins the match, essentially. And here we are with a triple threat match that I still tend to think that LA Knight's going to come out of this as the champion, but I guess the way you can look at this is, if he doesn't have to get pinned, right? So you can kind of maybe add a little bit more unpredictability into it, but I don't know. I'll have to think about this one more too, because right now I don't know that they've built up either Andrade or Carmelo to the level to where I feel like they should be taking the United States Championship away from LA Knight. And you could say, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because maybe this is what this series should have been able to do, right? But you don't have a winner in a Game 7 situation, and so, I'm not sure just yet. But we'll talk about that match more going into next week. But also announced was the 4-way match for the Women's Tag Team Championships. We're going to get that as well next week. We're going to get a singles fatal 4-way next week with 4 of the participants. But we know at Crown Jewel, we're going to get Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill defending against Damage Control, Chelsea Green and Piper Niven, and Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson. So, we've talked about Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson a lot. Like, they've certainly been used a lot now recently on the show. So it feels like kind of an official call-up, even though it kind of, I guess, hasn't been just yet, unless I missed something there over the past couple of days. But, yeah, so there's a match added to this, again, growing card of Crown Jewel, which has gotten bigger and bigger here. That was made official. And, elsewhere on the show, I think, sort of had the interesting interaction with Nia Jax sort of playing to Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell now instead of Tiffany Stratton. Tiffany's trying to step up handles some of Nia's business for her. She turns to Candice, but Bayley returns, makes the save. So I would assume at some point we're going to get a Bayley Naomi versus Candice LaRae and Indy Hartwell tag team match. But other than that, didn't get a lot more sort of forward movement on that particular story. But again, guys, I think that was pretty much, again, the highlights of this week's SmackDown. I'm trying to sort of skim through and see if I missed anything. Like I said, I may have, just given the circumstances. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where we stand. And I thought really the way they sort of structured the show, the segments, doing that whole main event thing together, I thought was smart to sort of have, the number one contenders match go straight into the championship match, and yeah, like everyone sort of gets what they want coming out of this in terms of getting your Bloodline reunion, big step number one. And then, now we see where it goes from here. You have new tag team champions. So a very, again, noteworthy addition, I think, of SmackDown. But I want to know what you guys think. What did you think about Jey and Jimmy reuniting? Do you think this was the right time to do it? Do you think they should have maybe built this up a little bit more? And how do you see it playing out from here? How do we get Sami Zayn into this thing? How do we get Paul Heyman into this thing? Let me know your predictions moving forward here as like I said, we are now 1 month away from Survivor Series and the big War Games match, which will be Bloodline versus Bloodline. And what are your thoughts on this Cody Rhodes situation and Randy Orton versus Kevin Owens? Always love the feedback, guys. So be sure to leave that feedback in the comments below and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out. Like I said, I appreciate you being patient with me here on this video. And again, I appreciate you watching as always. And let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE SmackDown.